I tested the best budget mirrorless cameras to find the best ones, but the best budget cameras of any kind are very specialized because each camera has different features, specs, and design for different styles of shooters, and this way you only pay for the features you need, thus saving you money. But trying to find the best budget mirrorless camera for your shooting style can be pretty confusing, and just because a camera looks good on paper doesn't mean it's right for you because there's so much more that goes into it. So in this video, we're looking at the best budget mirrorless cameras for different shooting styles and budgets. Also, I'll leave links down below for the best pricing on all the cameras we talk about today. Now, one of the best budget mirrorless cameras out there is also one of the easiest to use, and it's really beginner friendly, especially if you're new to photography and video and you don't quite understand the technical side of it yet. And this way you can get great photos and videos when you're just starting out. And that first camera is the Canon R50. But this is just the first camera on this list. Now, what makes the Canon R50 such a great camera and really sets it apart from the other cameras out there is mainly the user experience and design of this camera. It's a very small and compact body. It literally fits in the palm of your hands, but it still has a really solid grip and it's a satisfying camera to use. And the button layout is very well thought out and easy to navigate. It's something that Canon is known for when it comes to ergonomics and ease of use. And one of the main features that makes this camera such an easy camera to use is something known as intelligent auto mode, where you simply tell the camera what you want in terms of brightness, color, contrast, and even how much background blur you want, and the camera itself will make all the technical adjustments for you, and this way you can get the look for your photos and videos that you want without really having to know the complex technicals. Plus, it also has a side articulating screen for filming yourself and for vlogging, and that screen on the back is also touch sensitive, allowing you to change all of your major settings like shutter, ISO, and aperture just using the screen. And it also has a dedicated quick menu to change all of your other major settings without having to go into your menus. Plus, it also has touch autofocus. The autofocus on the R50 is pretty great overall. It's actually AI-based autofocus where it can intelligently track things like human, animals, and cars and automatically track autofocus just to those subjects when filming. This means there's no more losing autofocus on random things when filming, and it's going to make just using this camera a breeze overall. And the R50 also has a really high quality electronic viewfinder, which is way better than it should be on a budget camera like this. It's high resolution with very smooth motion, so if someone that really likes their electronic viewfinder, you're going to be very happy with it. The internal microphone on the R50 is pretty much just okay for vlogging, and I do recommend using an external microphone, which you do have an input for on this camera. And despite being such a small camera, the R50 honestly has pretty solid battery life, at least an hour and a half of video with non-stop shooting and several hundred photos on a single charge, meaning you could probably shoot with this camera all day. But what's inside the R50 is the really exciting part. It has a 24 megapixel APS-C size sensor, which is a very respectable amount of resolution when it comes to capturing a lot of detail and cropping into your photos. And something the R50 really excels at are the colors. Everything is very true to life, but everything is also very warm and vibrant right out of camera. You almost don't need to edit these photos to make them pop. In terms of photos, the R50 shoots anywhere between 12 to 15 frames per second, but what's more impressive is that it also shoots up to 28 to 48 JPEGs in a row, which is really good for capturing action, and you can also shoot for a pretty long time. But the R50 does have a downside. The R50 can only shoot 7 photos in a row when shooting in 14-bit RAW, which is pretty short. And this is going to be just fine for someone that's shooting slow-moving stuff like landscapes and portraits, and you don't really need to shoot that fast. But if this is a problem for you, there is a camera later in this list that solves this exact problem and is better for action shooters that also want to shoot RAW. Now, when it comes to video in the R50, this is what really sets the R50 apart. It shoots 4K at 24 and 30 frames per second that is also downsampled from 6K, giving you 6K detail but in a smaller 4K video file size, and essentially you're getting an extra 2K of resolution. And this feature isn't really something you see in budget camera models, so it's really nice to see here. And on top of that, the R50 can also shoot in 10-bit color when using HDR PQ mode. This mode is going to give you slightly flatter colors, which is going to give you more color flexibility, but also having 10-bit color is simply going to give you more color range to play around with. So the R50 is something that you can turn into a cinematic and professional looking camera if you know how to. The R50 also shoots full HD slow motion at 60 frames per second and 120 frames per second, and this is a really great feature to have. This way, if you ever want to record some epic slow motion or just some cool travel vlog stuff, you absolutely have the ability to do that. Plus, it also has digital stabilization for smooth handheld video and vlogging. The R50 is the newest and best budget mirrorless camera out right now. It's a great fit for not only people looking to shoot casual photos and videos, but also a great fit for someone that's just starting out, that has bigger aspirations down the line, but you simply want a good budget starting point. The only downside of this camera is in the photo department, where it cannot shoot raw photos for a very long time. And for you guys, I do have something later in this list. Now, if you're someone that's more focused on video shooting, YouTube, maybe you're a content creator, or you simply want a little bit more horsepower when it comes to the photo department, the next camera might just be for you. And that is the Sony ZV-E10. The first thing that really stands out about the ZV-E10 is the design. It's ultra compact and it's ultra minimalistic. It has no viewfinder and no flash, and it's mainly to keep the size down, but as you'll see later in this section, there's actually a few things that this camera has that absolutely makes up for the lack of viewfinder and flash. So first up, let's talk about this unique minimalistic design. It has one button to switch between photos, videos, and slow motion, and I really prefer this over a messy mode dial. But the best thing about this camera is the built-in mic. By not adding a flash or a viewfinder, you're able to get a super solid 3-capsule microphone that's going to give you ultra crisp audio even in busy locations. And not only does this mic sound really good, it's also going to save you money by not having to buy another microphone, but it's also going to help keep your camera that much smaller, and this is going to be really useful for content creators and vloggers. The ZV-E10 also has a side articulating screen, but it does not have the same touch functionality that the R50 does. However, you do still have touch autofocus. And the autofocus on the ZV-E10 is super solid. It's not AI based like the Canon R50, but Sony is so far ahead of the rest of the industry when it comes to autofocus that the autofocus in this camera is super solid. It's ultra sticky, ultra reliable, and it's also very fast as well. And you still have face and eye tracking, so if you're mainly shooting people, you won't really notice a difference. Now, with a small camera, you're naturally going to have a pretty small battery life, but in terms of record times, it's still pretty on par with the Canon R50. It's maybe 10% less. You'll get about 40 minutes of record time for video, but you'll still get several hundred photos. However, I would recommend having at least one spare battery with this camera. But the one upside is that you can also charge and power this camera via the USB-C. The sensor in the ZV-E10 is a 24 megapixel APS-C size sensor, which is similar to the Canon R50 in terms of resolution, but the ZV-E10 is significantly better for low light performance, making this camera a must for nighttime shooters for both photos and videos. You can easily vlog with this camera at nighttime and get very little grain, and your photos are still going to look sharp and crisp. And speaking of photos, the ZV-E10 is an absolute beast in this department. It can shoot slightly slower than the R50 at only 10 frames per second, but it can also shoot for a lot longer with 166 JPEGs in a row, or 44 raw photos, which is a lot more compared to the R50 that can only do 7. So if you're looking for more power in the photo department, the ZV-E10 is a great fit. And video is just as impressive on the ZV-E10. It shoots 4K at 24 and 30 frames per second, and this video is also downsampled from 6K, giving you the quality of 6K video, but in a smaller, more compact 4K file size. But the ZV-E10 does not have 10-bit color. However, I don't think that's as big of a deal because the ZV-E10 does have S-Log3 and cinema profiles built into this camera. And depending on who you ask, personally I would say the ZV-E10's cinema profiles are a better bet for people that want to make their videos look cinematic and really make the colors pop, and it's probably more important than just having regular 10-bit color in HDR PQ mode compared to the Canon R50. So it really depends on your style, but personally I would choose the ZV-E10, and there's plenty of people on YouTube that have made the ZV-E10 look like a pro camera. And the ZV-E10 also shoots full HD at 60 frames per second and 120 frames per second, and has digital stabilization, which is in my opinion much smoother and more stable when compared to Canon's digital stabilization. Now, something to add, if you love the ZV-E10 for the specs, but you kind of wish it had a more traditional mirrorless body with a flash and electronic viewfinder, there's actually an answer to that problem. There's also the Sony A6100 to consider. It's essentially the same camera, but in a more traditional body. Instead of a side articulating screen, it actually has a tilt screen on the back that flips up to the top if you want to see yourself. However, that screen does tend to get in the way of microphones. And the one thing the A6100 is lacking when compared to the ZV-E10 is the fact that it does not have cinema profiles for video. But if you're mainly a photo shooter, the A6100 is probably a better bet. So whether you're a photographer, a video shooter, a YouTuber, a content creator, The ZV-E10 and the A60-100 are two of the most powerful budget mirrorless cameras out there, and you can pick the exact camera that fits your style of shooting depending on what you need. Now, a lot of you guys are just starting out and you just want to keep it simple and keep it on a budget. Maybe you just want to do better than your cell phone, or maybe this is your first step into getting into the craft of photography and video. And the best value for your money in terms of budget mirrorless cameras, without a doubt, has to be the Canon R100. Now, the R100 does have some limitations when you consider the very affordable price point, but this camera is probably giving you 4 times the value for your money. The R100 has a very small and compact body, which is really convenient for on-the-go shooters or people that just want to travel light. Now, just because it's a small and affordable camera doesn't mean it's poor quality. Canon cameras are known to be built like tanks, and this camera is durable as heck. It's not weather sealed, so keep it away from water, but other than that, you should be just fine. Now, because it's a small camera, you also have a pretty small grip, but you still have a pretty solid feeling camera in your hands, and it doesn't feel like a toy. The R100 also has a flash built in, which I know a lot of you guys that are just starting out will find very helpful. Now, it is missing some of those more fancy features like a side articulating touchscreen, and in fact, the screen on the back is fixed and there is no touch functionality. But the screen on the back is still very bright and crisp, and it's a high quality LCD screen. Now, if you're worried about not having the touchscreen functionality, you can also connect this camera to your phone, and with your phone, you can remotely control this camera, change all the settings, but you also get touch autofocus when using your phone. Now, the Canon R100 doesn't have the same fancy autofocus that the Canon R50 did, but the autofocus overall is still super duper solid. And the R100 has the same intelligent auto feature that you see on the Canon R50, where you simply tell the camera what you want in terms of brightness, contrast, saturation, and the camera does all the technical work for you. This is going to be super helpful for beginner shooters. The internal audio on the Canon R100 is probably about as good as your phone. It's nothing special, but you can plug in an external microphone if you're serious about your audio. Now, the battery, as expected, is about as good as the Canon R50, so if you're just doing casual video and photo shooting throughout the day, you can probably shoot on this camera all day. The one downside is that the R100 cannot be charged via USB-C, so in order to charge the battery, you must have the Canon charger. The Canon R100 definitely cuts some corners when it comes to design to keep the price down, but when you see the absolutely incredible sensor in the R100, you can see why I recommend picking up this camera. The R100 has a 24 megapixel APS-C size sensor, which is very similar to the same sensor in the Canon R50 and the Canon R10, which are much more expensive cameras. And the Canon R100 has Canon's dual pixel autofocusing system in it. It's not the AI-based autofocusing system from the Canon R50, but it's still a very solid autofocusing system. It's actually contrast-based, so it doesn't have any kind of subject detection like the R50 does, but if you're a casual shooter that's just shooting for fun, that's just learning photography and video, you will be just fine. Speaking of shooting, the R100 takes photos at 6.5 frames per second, which is pretty slow when compared to the other cameras on this list, but if you're a casual shooter, you probably don't need to shoot anything faster for casual everyday lifestyle stuff, but this probably isn't a good camera for action. Where this camera does excel is portraits, lifestyle shots, and landscapes where things aren't moving too fast. But the one feature on the R100 that actually really impressed me is that you can actually take 100 JPEGs in a row, meaning you can pretty much shoot forever on this camera. So whatever you're shooting, if you don't know when to start, when to stop, you can pretty much just hit that shutter button and record forever, and you'll probably get the photo you want in there. Now, for video, the R100 is more of a full HD camera. In full HD mode, you can shoot 24, 30, 60, all the way to 120 frames per second, basically giving you all the frame rates you need. One thing to mention is that the R100 is also only an 8-bit camera without cinema profiles or any kind of creative profile. So with this camera, it's pretty much what you get is what you see when it comes to your video, and it's really not a camera I recommend trying to edit. It does have 4K, but in 4K mode, you have a pretty heavy crop into your image, which kind of destroys the quality, and you also get a lot of rolling shutter. This is really not a 4K camera, and it's not something I recommend for 4K shooters. If you really want good 4K, the R50, the ZV-E10, the A60-100 are much better cameras. But surprisingly, the Canon R100 also has digital stabilization built in, which is just about as good as the Canon R50. So if you're doing handheld video or any kind of vlogging, your video will come out perfectly smooth. Overall, the Canon R100 is a solid, well-built camera with phenomenal photo and video quality, and I'm really impressed by how much you get with this camera considering the price point. And if you want to get the best possible pricing on your Canon R100 or any of the other cameras we talked about today, make sure to check out the links in the description down below, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.